my bearings. Okay, hello, I'm Natalie. I'm here to talk on behalf of Glasgow Autonomous Space, which is a radical social centre in the south side of Glasgow in Tradeston. And before I speak, I just want to clarify that I'm going to be using the phrase we a lot while I'm talking, and that just refers to the crew of people who collectively run GAS and just handle the day-to-day stuff, so that's what I mean when I say we. Okay, so what is GAS? I'm going to be talking about from our experience as radical, non-hierarchical organising and the barriers and challenges such organisations face due not only to private property, but how our resources at a community level are distributed. As well as this, I will also outline how we are trying to subvert what we see as a failing system that continues to only underserve those who require the most help and resources in our communities. But before I get into all of that, I think it's really important that I establish a context for you to understand all the experiences we've amassed over the years, whilst doing this and setting it up and opening the space. So GAS, as previously mentioned, is a radical social centre in the south side of Glasgow, and our mission statement is to host groups struggling against capitalism and other forms of oppression, which admittedly is a bit vague, but that is by choice because we do want it to be a space for people who feel like they're being underrepresented in any way. It's completely open, and so we don't want things to be too pigeonholed by our mission statement. We make all decisions based on consensus and strictly not for profit. GAS first came about due to the efforts of a previous group of people who would meet regularly to plan and raise the funds to create a social centre. Unfortunately, this group struggled to maintain the capacity and secure the funds to open such a place, but thanks to them, the groundwork was put in, and in their planning of a social centre, it wasn't in vain, and was carried on when last year, the start of the year, a five-year lease was signed on an empty warehouse in Tradeston, which had absolutely nothing in it. It was just a completely empty shell unit. And after that, the lease was signed, a core group of people began to reach out to the local community. They were mostly built up of grassroots activist groups such as Glasgow Carpentry Collective. And they reached out to the community and put a shout out just that everyone was welcome to come and help build this place, and that we were trying to build a community centre or a social centre that would be open for all and wouldn't be paywalled, and we just wanted to get as many people from as many backgrounds involved as possible. And we did this by holding regular work days. We would have these pretty regularly, maybe bi-weekly at the start of the space. It was just a chance for anyone to come round, and people more skilled in tools would skill share with them and show them how to build and encourage them to really get involved. And we also had days that were more targeted towards women, non-binary and trans people, which is where I first came into GAS's contact. And after months of hard work, our empty shell facility was really transformed through the help of lots of amazing people who gave up so much of their free time. As you can see, doing a variety of things, from painting the walls to making signs to actually making the rooms themselves. And what we eventually came with was the complete build, which I'll talk you through now. This is our upstairs mezzanine level meeting room that we built, which groups can use for whatever they fancy. And this is our kitchen, which is on the same level, which is also completely open and free for people to use. And we have a fridge and cabinets full of reclaimed food that's always going about. The groups who use the space are more than welcome to tuck into. And this is just a little shot of our hallway on our mezzanine level. And this is the downstairs. This is the main accessible meeting room that you can get into at GAS. And this door at the very back is the wood workshop, which unfortunately I couldn't get a picture of in time for today. But there's a wood workshop that's open behind that door there. And these are two accessible and non-accessible gender-neutral toilets we built. And this is our library room, which is under the stairs below our mezzanine. So after this was all done, the next step was to form a crew which would deal with the more maintenance and administrative side of running a social centre. This group was formed about a year ago now, and it has been completely fluid in its membership, with different people coming in to help all the time, and it's not even the same people who were involved at the start involved now. After most of the build was complete, we then reached out further into the local community by hosting socials. And the first one, the whole idea was that we reached out to lots of grassroots activist groups and made them aware of the space and the free resources we were providing, in the hopes that they would use us, and it was very successful. But now we use socials as more a way to bring lots of different communities together. And it's just a great way. You've got to put yourself in the presentation somewhere, obviously. And it's just a great way to get people who otherwise would never come into contact with each other to just start talking and share like-minded ideals and skill share. Every social is different. We've had live music, we've had workshops, we've had gardening. It just depends on what people's capacity is, and it's completely open. Anyone is free to come and host anything at any of our socials. So GAS today, GAS has now arrived at the point where the foundations are there. Most of the build is complete. However, we want the future of GAS to be completely fluid in terms of the people who run it and how the space is transformed. We have recently had a gardening project start up to transform the outside of the space, but all groups that have come into contact with GAS have left their mark on the space, be it from cabinets they built for storage or handrails that mean that we can pass council inspections due to safety from the Welding Collective. Everyone has contributed in some way, and it's really inspiring thing to be part of. And who knows where it'll be in 2 years, how it will look and who will become involved, because we're completely open to that changing at all times. We don't want anything to be set in stone whatsoever. And this is just a little brief template of what's going to be happening in our garden. It's going to be formed into a community herbal gardening project that people can make use of. So on to the principles of GAS. What do we mean by autonomy? Well, GAS is run not for profit and by a crew of people that's completely open. All ideological and permanent issues are decided upon by all the people who use the space. The crew exists just to do admin, the bins, budgeting, social media, and all the stuff that just comes from day-to-day management. The group has grown and shifted as people's capacity for volunteering changes, obviously, but we also believe in autonomy in the sense that we think it's really important that all the groups have a say in all the ideological and permanent issues that the space faces, because otherwise what's going to happen is we're going to just have a crew of people that will essentially replicate the state and be making decisions on behalf of people. And that's something we just want to completely avoid. We want everyone to feel like they can constantly speak up and have a say in how things are run. And we do this by holding meetings regularly where we will ask people who use the space and people in the wider community to come and express any issues, any proposals they have with the space and how it's run, and we all talk through those. And they're always externally facilitated to make sure that no one is dominating conversations and the like. But that being said, as far as openness goes, we do have very brief guidelines for all the groups, just a safer space policy, if you will, that we call the GAS agreement, which I'll go through with you. So the first thing, communicate in a clear way, which is really important, we think, because a lot of conversations about politics can become very jargonized, and people who don't know what you mean can really not have the confidence to speak out. So we introduce hand gestures and stuff to all our meetings, like jargon is that, and if you agree with someone, you do that, and it's good. It brings a bit of fun as well to pretty dry meetings sometimes. Be willing to listen and understand each other is pretty self-explanatory. Be responsible for our actions and be ready to make changes in the ways that are asked of us. We are very firmly believe in accountability, and if people raise issues of problematic behaviours in the space, we have an open group also that deals with all of those separate from the gas crew, who also feed back into all the organisations that use the space just to make sure everyone's happy and looked after. And accept that others' lives and histories outside the space may be different to our own. That's obviously very important too. Support and believe each other. Not make assumptions on what people are comfortable with, and respect each other's boundaries, obviously very important as well. Be aware of how we speak and how our behaviour might be affecting those around us. Do not drink alcohol or take drugs in the space. Keep the space clean and tidy. The last one regarding alcohol obviously helps us in the fact that we don't have to have a license for it, but it's also really important to us because we feel that a lot of problematic behaviours are very exacerbated by alcohol, and it can be hard for a lot of people to feel safe in a space where people are drinking. Let me just have a water sip. So why organise this way? GAS is people in a community coming together to challenge the barriers of capitalism and the problems private property bring to our community is a big part of that. In a time when housing is desperately in need, people are very neglected by the government. All you need to do is walk around the area surrounding GAS to witness the horrendous neglect that goes on due to mass private property ownership. There's houses, industrial allotments, flats, all left empty to rot while the investors wait on someone with money to make it worth their while to sell those on, and then it just gets gentrified into businesses. And the reason we also organise in a not charging people for space way is because in Glasgow consistently activist groups fell through due to a lack of affordable, regular, reliable space. And we're trying our best to be a solution to that, to not paywall the time and space, to try and autonomously fuel the movements that we really need in our society, we believe. And the proof that this is desperately needed has already been seen. We have been open to the public maybe about 8 months, and we are practically full almost every day already, like every month. People constantly contacting us, almost on a daily basis now, new groups contacting us looking for free, reliable space, because it is a really hard thing to find in the city. But obviously the biggest issue we run into is one I've already alluded to, and that is money and financing and funding. Without any money behind any projects, and it's very hard to get money behind a project when you're criticising the state that's giving out the resources, most projects will just fall. And we would not exist, in all honesty, if it weren't for the belief and generosity of an anonymous donor at the start. We've received more radical funding from like the Edge Fund and stuff like that, but it was truly without that we wouldn't be in the position we're in right now. And even though we were lucky enough to have that, and that helped us in a great capacity, we are still renting the space, we don't own it. So it's still a constant barrier for us to like provide this free space and this great resource for people who need it, whilst also being charged increasing rent every month. It can be really hard. But we are making, our ambition anyway, and we're making great strides towards it, is to become completely self-sustaining and to get to the point where we don't need to rely on funding at all and we can just fundraise. And obviously we're just building up to the point where we have enough people with enough skills to share and capacity to do things like this, but it's a thing we're constantly learning, and the more people who get involved the better. There's always something to learn from everyone. So why not government funding? And the main issue with this really is the biggest question is, how can you be expected to stand up for people who need help the most in our communities when the government continuously chooses to ignore them, illegally deport them, take their rights away, and cut financing to their services? Our system ignores so many people for so many reasons, and for that reason alone we stand to try and find an alternative, something that doesn't rely on the state, so that people can come together and learn from each other and skill share. And it's very easy for a lot of people to forget that feeling comfortable around the state is very much a privilege that not everyone is afforded. But as mentioned, the constant barrier that will ever affect true change is the necessity of funding. Buildings which will be empty for the next 10 years will still be there, and we're not allowed to reclaim them for the people instead of profit. And in particular in Scotland, this is really challenging because you see great actions taking place in England with like Sisters Uncut, who reclaimed council housing, and that's stuff like that's fantastic. But the fact that squatting is so hard to do here makes things like that practically impossible in Scotland. And it is something that if we truly tried to get the government to maybe be a bit more open-minded to, it could bring so much radical change, because there is so much empty buildings lying about in this city and people are literally sleeping in the street outside them. It's just ridiculous at this point. So we don't, essentially, to sum it up, take government funding because we're trying our best to maintain our ethos, and it can be a very challenging prospect, but it's definitely one we feel is worth taking because it really opens up your organising and your community in ways that otherwise wouldn't be possible. Sorry. So, to further go into what we truly believe in empowering communities through supporting them. And we believe we do this by giving people a say in how the space is run, and keeping an open door policy does that. I know I'm one individual person talking here, but I am no more an influence over anything in gas than anyone. So many people have helped out on this project, and yet we're still in our infancy. Fluidity in organisations is an important factor, we believe, for ensuring that we avoid someone becoming overrepresented or over-influential. We want everyone to feel like they belong and have a right to express what they think is right within the space. We think this is important because giving people the say, the chance to speak up, though it's not easy to encourage, is definitely worth it, and it helps shift your perspective in ways you could never imagine. The decision-making process truly opens up, and every decision we thought was a sure thing in a meeting comes out in a completely different mutation, just because everyone's encouraged to give their input on it. And everyone always has something valuable to say. But that being said, it is definitely a process which can be improved upon. Although non-hierarchical organising does appear very open, it can be very hard at times to get those with less privilege in our communities to talk up, for obvious reasons. If the system oppresses you extremely, you're going to be a lot less confident than those who have been afforded privileges all their life. So we're doing our best, and we're completely open to anyone coming in and chipping in and helping us out. And before I wrap up and go on to questions, I would say that if anyone in this room likes the sound of what we're doing, you're more than welcome to come and talk to me, give me your email and get involved, essentially. But, so essentially by what we're trying to do is we're trying to be open, be fluid as an organisation, and ensure that people looking to create space for any community can come in and do so. And we're trying to ensure that through this non-charging for space, just complete fluidity, complete openness, complete transparency, just so everyone can eventually feel that gas is in some way theirs. So, any questions?
It's not a question, it's just a statement. It sounds amazing. Well done.
Thanks.
It sounds impossible, it sounds difficult, but it sounds wrong. So keep going.
Oh yeah, thank you. Hi.
Yeah, I think the commitment that you're offering is enormous, and the list of kind of the guidelines that you're putting, I think, is really empowering to people that feel afraid of alcohol.
Yeah.
People experience violence. I wanted to ask you, have you been surprised by some of the youth groups that approach gas in terms of how they want to use the space? Could you just give a few examples of some of the diverse numbers of groups that come?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably one of my favorite things about it, to be honest, is just the surprise you get every time you like check the emails. We've had proposals for like radical choirs. We have an Arabic English exchange. We've had people contact us about theatre productions with puppets and stuff that they want to put on for kids in the community. It just varies every day, and like because we try to, for the best of us, obviously we don't have the resources to accommodate everyone because a lot of the stuff in the space has been donated to us. But we just try to have a just say yes policy to people who want to use the space and just make people feel welcome. And I don't think, obviously within reason, there are groups we will say no to if they challenge our values and stuff. But yeah, we try to be as open-minded as possible.
I've got one then about, so one of the questions in the blurb for the day, or for the week, is about organisation, and obviously this is, I think, probably the most concrete example of that we've looked at so far. One of the key things in terms of organisation is thinking about scale and how things can be scaled up onto larger levels that can work beyond something kind of localized, that might be a model that can be kind of reproduced or expanded upon. And I know it's early days, and you're really kind of acknowledging the difficulties and stuff that you face, but I wonder to what extent that's sort of factoring into your mindset, whether you're kind of using the space as a practical experiment in trying to kind of improve how a sort of non-hierarchical organisation model might actually be kind of used beyond just the small scale of this one space.
Yeah, I definitely think that we are just going furthermore, like, we knew when we started the space, like, what we were aiming for, because of as I mentioned, the previous group that tried to set one up had left like this massive book with when they had just like gone through all the issues and stuff and all the problems that could come up with organizing in this way. So we eventually got to the point where it was just like, we've talked about this a lot. I feel like we just shouldn't really be afraid of making mistakes and just maybe go for it, and like actually try and do this, because it is impossible to know like all the things that can come up, and you just have to try and get people together and empower them to not be afraid to make something different and just go for it, essentially. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I also think, you mentioned the idea of like an anonymous donor at the beginning, and I totally understand that, projects need that to get off the ground. Is the idea that you would become kind of self-sufficient somehow?
Yeah, that's the ambition, and then hopefully, if we were to get very ambitious, we could eventually help other communities make their gas, or whatever they would end up calling it. But the whole idea is self-sustaining, so that we don't have to rely on anyone, because, accept ourselves to raise funds for the place.
Can I ask you how you're planning to do the fundraising?
We do it by hosting, so we do it at the socials, and some of the groups who use our space, we're lucky enough, do donate to us as well, although we don't enforce it upon them. And we also are just planning typical fundraisers, like either bands playing in the space and people can come and there's a suggested donation and stuff like that. It's something we're still very much working on, because we've been lucky enough to secure funding to get us to this point.
Because my question was going to ask, how do you see the longevity of gas just being based on that in an economy that's so fluctuant?
Yeah, it's definitely something that is far less sure, but the whole ambition behind it is that if we have enough people eventually become involved in the space, it will get to the point where the work never becomes too much, because it's so shared out. And because for a lot of groups, that's usually the main hindrance, is just your capacity goes, because obviously we all also work jobs and have lives and stuff outside of the space. So you just hope that you can encourage enough people to get involved and just believe in the space. Once we found that people who believe in the space are really invested in it, especially because they can form it in any way they want. So it helps to make it a bit more stable in its support. Does that? Yeah. Hey, sorry.
Yeah, I just wondered, what does it kind of replace in a sense that the groups that use the space would have maybe used more like community centre before? Do you think is it shifting people away from a state-provided resource to one that's then your responsibility to provide your own kind of admission, that's what you want to do? But I'm just wondering if you've got a kind of position on that in the sense that it is kind of replacing almost removing responsibility from the state rather than centre or space to then provide that facility.
Yeah, well, a lot of the groups that use gas don't have the resources at all for their communities, and that's why they're using it. And we've only maybe like 2 or so organisations that have come to us have all used spaces before, but it's never been state provided. They've always been doing it out of their own funds because they're generally activists and doing things in a radical sense. So yeah, ideally we just want to overthrow like the system, I guess, that like ignores people. And as ridiculous as that sounds, and as lofty an ambition as that sounds, it is something we all stand by, and like we just want people to stop being led and leading themselves, you know. Like, I think the last thing we need anymore is more leaders, people telling people what to do.
Yeah,
So.
it's just like it's kind of how the system doesn't work, I suppose, at the moment, in that we have so many community centres provided by like Glasgow Life or others that maybe not used to even like 30-50% capacity. So it's kind of like an interesting sort of, I don't know what the answer is to the amazing one, it's just, you know, how that works together.
Yeah.
Just a quick one. It's really interesting when you talked about who your youth groups are, because it also sounds like a kind of, you know, in terms of your point, the normality of what community should be. So you didn't reel off lists of kind of, you know, conflict groups or, you know, extreme political parties or alternative parties. Actually, it's public shows and it's people coming together. And it's interesting, maybe it's about the fact that people feel alienated from a council-run space.
Yeah, of course, definitely.
And that in itself is a political act.
Yeah, there are lots of people as well who they would not feel safe using a council-run space at all, and a lot of it has to do with people's just lack of faith in the system anymore, because it underrepresents them. And I feel that the people who have been coming to us have truly, like, it's helped so many people already, and like the confidence it builds up in people to be able to like take an actual part in the design and in the running of a space is really invaluable, I think.
I was just thinking of that horrible problem you mentioned, which was rent.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the bane of hierarchical as well as autonomous organisations. Have you thought about you talked about being self-sustaining, so what does that actually mean? Does that mean having your own building, or how do you resolve that conundrum?
Well, ideally we would not want to pay rent and make the place a publicly open space, but yeah, for now, self-sustaining just means getting to the point where we don't rely on other people's funding to fund ourselves. So just by putting on events and throughout Glasgow, and there's other organisations that help, like Canning Park Complex and stuff like that help us out and would give us their space for free to have more like dancey club nights or something like that if we wanted to do that. So it's, for now, the main ambition is just funding ourselves and paying our rent and our bills by ourselves.
Any more questions?
I was just thinking, I think I was wondering about the similarities between the kind of impetus of starting gas as to the same sort of like feeling that there was around starting organisations
Mm-hmm.
And I was just, maybe I'm trying to find a question then, but I guess I'm just wondering with time, do you think, well, how do we stop the same thing happening to gas that happens, or, has happened to these spaces?
Yeah,
Or maybe, I don't know, maybe people have a different view, maybe people still think there's room to be radical, and think, perhaps this, we are doing that now.
yeah, it's a good question. It's something really like I wouldn't feel 100% comfortable like flat out saying on behalf of everyone at GAS, but for any of this, by the way, it's just me speaking. But I guess our ambition of being self-sustaining is how we will is why we want to do that, because we want to avoid things like that. We don't want other people to put rules upon us and have expectations and say, oh, you can't do that, or you can't do this here, or who is coming in, give me names and lists and stuff like that. Like we just want to avoid as much of that as possible so that it can be as open and transparent and as easy for people to come and get involved as possible. And yeah, declaring yourself as an organisation and taking funding from the government and stuff makes that a bit more hard. Like you said, is that answer? Yeah.
Can I just ask about the organisation? So this kind of relates to that really. You talk about that idea of like it's very fluid. You say people coming in now, and there's people involved now maybe aren't the people who were involved a year ago in terms of that organising kind of group. But I just wondered if there was any how you ensure that a group like that that's so fluid doesn't be, I guess in a way it can be quite easily kind of, if a very strong character comes in and they kind of do, become the dominant character, I wondered what sort of things you have in place to maybe stop that happening, or whether, in terms of an organisational sense, is the kind of checks and balances that you kind of have in place to stop somebody being able to be the dominant person who maybe says we should go for funding because that's the only way we can survive, or whatever, it might then change the direction of the organisation.
Yeah, I think we do like see this as a problem that can happen very easily, of course, because some like confidence is something not everyone has, and speaking in a group situation at a meeting can be very hard for some people. But we try to avoid stuff like that happening because all our meetings are facilitated and everyone is given a turn to speak. And if people, like the gas agreement, if people are talking too much or talking over people, they are held accountable for that behaviour, because it can be very oppressive in itself, just constantly talking over people and constantly dominating a conversation. So that's why we have a gas agreement crew as well as the crew that does all the like bins and stuff. Just so that they can like communally get together, speak about issues that are raised about people's behaviours and tackle them head on, and like just explain to people that they need to adjust their behaviours if they want to be present within the space, because we're truly passionate about everyone having the chance and feeling like they have the chance to talk.
How do you reach agreements? Because like even just like being in a committee and being like at Market Garage, it's like sometimes you can't. It's like mistakes between like 75 people. Making an agreement is hard when you have so many like in a structure that's completely non-hierarchical. I guess there's a point where you have to make decisions, and those decisions, like really important decisions, sometimes won't make everyone happy. So how do you go through that?
How do we do that? Sorry. Let me just get my thoughts together first. It's definitely never an easy process for starters, and meetings can be very long, and I guess we just have accepted the fact that we are still all learning every day through this process, because it is something that is very different, and we're just not afraid to let things go on maybe a bit too long in the hopes that people will reach a consensus. And by having a facilitator at a meeting, that really helps because they are impartial. They're not like speaking up for themselves during it. They're just listening to both sides and trying to weave them together. And we do also, like, if people strongly disagree with a position that the space has taken, they can veto things and like explain to the wider community why. So we don't want anything to like go pie and people to be unhappy with the decisions. We just try to make it, as transparent as possible, because some people only chip in via email as well for the meetings, and just by doing that, the more perspectives you have, the more you can compromise, really. So I think it's just best to ask as much people as possible.
Can I ask you a question about, you have self-developed this, not you personally, you've self-developed this space. What resource do you think would be really useful, if such a thing existed, for other people who may wish to develop a space like yours in Scotland, that they could just access to? You know, we're all sort of reinventing the wheel because every time somebody does it, they do it their way, and people somewhere else in Inverness or something might think, this is fantastic, but we don't even know where to start. You know, if there was like a deposited knowledge, let's call it, or something, do you think that would be a useful thing to have, and how might that happen?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it would be best for it to not be too strict, I think, because different...
I think just guiding people through, like, how do you approach a landlord, or what licenses do you need if you say, like, no, you can run things in your space as long as you don't allow alcohol. It's quite straightforward, but as soon as you introduce that, it becomes a bit complicated.
Yeah, it is definitely a good idea, and I think, it would probably be worth for us to write about how we've approached all these things so that other community groups can maybe learn from it. But I think like a really important thing is that you get people with, if you have people with skills, you make sure that they don't just use the skill, they share it, and that, because otherwise you're just like, people are going to be not confident enough to just like say, can you show me how to make a door or something like that, you know what I mean? So the importance is that the people who have the more experience, the more confidence, help pull the people who don't have that up to them. Like if we were all in the sea, like the people with all the skills have all the floats and stuff and they're handing it out. That's how I see it anyway. If that makes sense. Yeah.
I'm going to bring it to a close there. There's so many questions, and I think we could probably go on even longer, but in the spirit of sort of non-hierarchy, I'm going to try and make sure that everyone gets their slot. So, Natalie, thank you so much.
Okay, cool. Thanks for listening.